All right, there are many reactions on the president's visit to China, and more importantly, how the visit will translate to better economic gains for the country.
More economists are also reacting to this already, and it's beginning to seem like Nigerians cannot wait to see the gains of some of these trips by the president.
All right, we have an economic analyst, Ken Ife. He joins us now on phone from Abuja. Now, Ken, good morning. It's good to have you on. First of all, let me ask you, one of the reactions we hear from Nigerians every day is the number of trips the president is embarking on. What is your reaction when it comes to how beneficial they are to Nigeria?
Look, they're very important, to be honest with you. There are 4 reasons. First of all, you know the president was maligned heavily during the election. So he had to go around to meet investors face to face. And honestly, those meetings have been reassuring because when you meet with him, you feel you can do business with him. So that's number one on the business front. Then, of course, the second one is that the nature of the security challenges facing Nigeria was such that it has to be handled at the highest level, the commitment. So he had to go around all the Francophone countries that surround Nigeria and then also talk to France that controls all those Francophone countries to really get them to commit troops and to really slot it out. And you can see the results. Then the third one is to go for investment. And you can see that going to China is part of that investment drive, and the Arab countries part of the investment drive, and all the U.S. The U.S. was spectacularly successful because, you know, there are so many European U.S. companies that wouldn't come to Nigeria under any circumstances unless the issue of corruption is tackled head on. This is because America has a law, which is called the Foreign Thought Act, that really tells you if American company misbehaves in your country, don't worry, just come to America and sue them. And you get all of them being sent to jail, directors. I mean, you've seen that in Halliburton. So now that they have seen a seriousness on that front, that's why they're coming in. Then, of course, there are other areas like the oil crisis, having to get the heads of states to rein in and stop reduce production volume so that we can get price increase. He had to actually go out to the oil, to Saudi Arabia and to talk to them before they can actually agree. And then now you can see the result. There's, trickle increase in those. So there are good reasons. But we will tell you when we think is a lot more time is being spent. But at this moment, it's very, very important that he keeps on with what he's doing.
All right,
but
it's good that...
I need to come to the real issue about China. I don't know when you want me to talk about it. I really want to talk about it.
Okay, it's good that this is a good thing for the country, but we'll begin to wonder as a layman, will these investors sacrifice the president's presence on the altar of weak Naira compared to the dollar and some other economic indices that are not acting up right now in Nigeria's favor?
Well, I have to tell you that the responsibility for monetary policy is that of the central bank. And also that we're going to also recognize that a lot of the factors around the current crisis we are having are actually global in nature, instigated by the tapering of the Federal Reserve Bank on their quantitative easing and the impact of outflow on Nigeria. And secondly, the oil price drop. Both of them acted interactively to encounter a very weak monocultural economy in Nigeria. And then we are now boxed into a corner where a receipt of $1 billion a month, a drop from 3.2 billion to 1 billion a month from central to central bank, is facing a request for $4.66 billion. So it's really very difficult for them to handle that, but they're doing their best. I think more could be done. There's absolutely no doubt that more could be done. And those two areas that this has more to be done is what's going on in China right now. And I think I need to say the importance of this to the whole financial equation that we are facing.
All right. Now, we know that there are lots of the deficit is multi-sectoral in Nigeria, generally from housing to aviation infrastructure, name it as the case may be. But there is a lot of pressure from Nigerians as to what areas the government should act. But if a step has to be taken, what areas should the priority be right now?
Okay. Now, look in terms of Nigeria-China relation, because that will bring out all these priorities. Nigeria's trade with China is $16 billion, and we're in severe deficit in that. So, and the FDI last year was $2.5 billion, and then we have an infrastructure loan of $1.1 billion. Now, China has $3.7 trillion reserves, so they have the money. Even America is borrowing from China. So I would expect the president to talk seriously to China on two objectives. The first key objective is to address the imbalance. FDI last year was $2.5 billion. And then we have an infrastructure loan of $1.1 billion. Now, China has $3.7 trillion reserves. So they have the money. Even America is borrowing from China. So I would expect the president to talk seriously to China on two objectives. The first key objective is to address the imbalance and correct the imbalance in trade and deepen the trade relations, particularly in the area of industrial activity. And I will give you some key actions in this area. Then the second objective is really to deepen the technical cooperation and trade in services. Now, I will give you the example. I will give you examples to support those two objectives. The first objective is really the strategy. The first strategy is to increase export to China of crude oil, natural gas, and solid minerals, which China buys. It's the biggest buyer. But it's not buying from Nigeria. It's not buying enough from Nigeria. But the way you do it is to strategically encourage China to invest in the upstream, midstream, and downstream sectors of oil, gas, and solid mineral. So that when their companies are doing it here, you don't have to argue with them because they're going to have to export them back to China. So that's number one. Number two, the second strategy is to increase Chinese investment in our industrial diversification and import substitution strategy by encouraging them to invest in the trade-free zone for re-export. Now, if you don't direct them to trade-free zone, they will see it as a hostile program that is intended to substitute their export into Nigeria. But if you encourage them to invest in those industries for the purpose of repackaging, for the purpose of value addition, and for the purpose of assembling of cars and stuff like that, and they will re-export them to Africa and the other, even to America, where we enjoy the AGOA, then they will understand that and they will comply. Because after all, China started with industrial zones all around China. That's how they started. So they understand that very well. And of course, the third area is to get them to encourage China to invest some of their 3.7 trillion reserves in national and regional infrastructure, which they are doing now. But the particular one we're interested in is rail, coal to power, gas to power, dams to power, water, and agri. Now, China opens at least one coal power station every week, at least. And we have reserve of coal in 12 states. So if they come in to mine the coal, they will use it to generate power. They are the experts, they're number one in the world in this area. So you don't need to give them any lesson on this. And if they invest in the upstream, of course, the gas, the natural gas will go to power generation. So China can crack our problems. And they can do the gas and power to power, both on the Niger Delta belt and also in the inland sedimentary basins, where we have loads of gas in Enugu State, Anambra State, Kogi State, Imo State, and then going up to the north in Chad, we have gas in inland basins. Then finally, on the second objective, the purpose there will be to deepen cooperation. Let of Nigerians train in China, let of China train in Nigeria, and let us create Chinatowns in some major cities like Abuja and Lagos, and create Nigerian village or African village in bigger cities in China, so that we can, and then they will not have China's industrial estate, China's housing estate to back all those investors, China's agricultural village, as you have in Kainji Dam in Niger State. So this is the kind of area they will be excited because these are the things they want to do in Africa. But you're going to take it to them as a package and tell the Prime Minister, look, bring $50 billion to cover this kind of package. They will do a deal with Nigeria and stop being just one of the 54 African countries. So if they say they are bringing 20 billion, we'll go and get the share. No.
All right, Ken.
Enough to command respect from China and do a strong bilateral deal. So serious money.
All right, Ken.
$200 billion. Put serious money on the table. China will play ball. Nigeria's approach to China has to be strategic. It's not asking for isolated things here and there. You have to package it from their perspective. That's why I was giving you clear objectives so that they see this. You are actually invoking. You're actually making them feel that there is something in it for them, rather than just something in it for you. So that's why if you look at all the objectives, I carefully balance those objectives. For example, when I say the first strategy, which is to increase export to China of crude, natural gas, and solid minerals, they are the biggest buyers of these products. And why are they not buying enough from Nigeria to correct the balance of trade in a deficit? So you don't tell them, all right, we are going to buy more. Fine. No. Ask them to invest in those areas so that their companies, they have investment. There's no way China will not buy crude produced by their company in Nigeria. There's no way they will not buy gas. They will not buy solid minerals produced by Chinese investment in Nigeria. So you got to go down. That's where you have to go. If you don't settle for, okay, we will increase the trade by 10%, they won't buy anything because there are thousands of people wanting to sell to China. So that's the number one. Then the second one that I mentioned, which is to get agricultural settlements, and when you get agricultural settlements, get them to invest in dam to agriculture, dam to farm power, dam to water supply. The ministers are there. So you are going to the time, they will say, okay, after China is building the biggest dam, Mambila. So you connect them so that they know that they will have more settlements, Chinese settlements along those banks. They will do the agriculture. I visited one of them in Kainji, where they have settlement there, Chinese settlements, and that they're also using the dam in the Kainji Dam. These are the kind of things, so they have involvement, they have stake. Not to tell them, you don't to give them loan and then they will be wondering whether they will ever get that loan spent well and all sorts of story. Lock them into the project. And then I talked about the diversification strategy. Now that diversification strategy is, we know what the language is for us, but you cannot use that language for China. You cannot tell them this is import substitution strategy. They will say to you, why? What do you mean? You want to stop buying our things? No, you don't talk like that. But what you say is, we want to protect infant industry.
All right. Okay, Mr. Ife. Okay, we still have joining us right now an economic researcher, Uche Igwe, via Skype, talking about the issue of China relation and the benefits for Nigeria. And Mr. Uche, many thanks for joining us this morning on TVC Breakfast. If you've heard what Mr. Ife said, that the issue of going to China shouldn't just be packaging what we have to say, but we have to package it properly and speak the language of the Chinese. What do you think that language is?
Well, I think that what language we speak to China shouldn't be different from the language we speak elsewhere. The thing is that we need to show to the world that we are prepared for investment, and we need to show to the world that we have internally consistency in our country. Because I don't think that this is about marketing. Are you hearing me?
Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
Yes, I don't think this goes beyond marketing. Because if we don't have a plan, it will look like, a one-off thing. The domestic realities at home must reflect to China and other prospective investors that we are competitive. I don't think, I agree with what the last speaker said, but we also need to know that we have raw material. I know that oil prices are low. Again, the kind of sector like the infrastructure areas, like the rail sector, is an important sector for a country like Nigeria, but it's not a highly profitable sector. All over the world, the railways are subsidized. So we must be careful how we package, our application for loans, in terms of having to say things that are not very possible. Here, in the UK and so many places in the world, the rail lines are subsidized. So, very useful thing to do, because Nigeria is long overdue for a functional railway system. But I don't think that we should package it from the direction of, profitability, because, it may not happen very easily. I mean, there are all kinds of conversations about either rehabilitating the narrow gauge or, going for a brand new standard gauge. Those are very important issues. So, yes, we have something to say, we have raw material, but again, we must show that we, in our country, we are prepared in terms of competitiveness, when we are prepared for investment, and that should be a consistent story, not only to China, but to other investors.
Uche Igwe, the point there is about $6 billion is expected to be given to Nigeria for different infrastructural or different investment reasons generally. This is not the first time much monies have been given to Nigeria one way or the other. What is going to make this one different?
Well, I think that what is basically different is that the federal government is sending a signal, both domestically and internationally, that leakages are going to be plugged this time. My sense is that really, since the days of the oil boom, there has been money in the country, but these monies have, one way or the other, found their way back into private pockets. So I think the fact that the federal government is willing to plug leakages, and the domestic economy in terms of the public sector is crucial. So that message must be clear. Beyond sending the message, it is important that federal government also demonstrates, infrastructure locally, to make sure that, they walk the talk in terms of making sure that these monies do not leak to private pockets, articulating a clear plan, saying clearly what will go where. I mean, the kind of controversies we see in the National Assembly in terms of budgeting, this is a digital world. It's not helpful.
Okay.
It is not helpful. Such signals, are not going to be helpful in the long term, both to prospective investors like China and also citizens, who are expected to develop confidence in what the government is doing and also have a buy-in.
Okay, do you see this as a win-win situation? Because some section of Nigerians are worried that this borrowing might just put Nigeria in the pocket of China. And as you know, there's a scramble for Africa part two, if you will. Is that the case?
Well, I think that the whole conversation will be what we make it. It is not going to be, we do not want to get into the pocket of China. We can't get into the pocket of China until we do, or we plan to do so. So I think it's important that the government ab initio set of conditions that are competitive. Yes, we need the investment, but China, for instance, has been quite, permit me to use the word, notorious, in terms of environmental regulations and long-term sustainability of the projects they get into. We must not ignore that. Yes, we need the money, but it is important that we articulate very clearly that it will meet standards of sustainability in the long term, so that we don't get into very unsustainable exercises. So in the long run, this loan, this conversation, this relationship will be more of what we make of it as a nation. And that is why we have to be careful for every step we take, because loans are for generations yet unborn, so we cannot mortgage them. So it is on the side of the federal government to get into the right kind of deals, not for China to dictate, even though we need the loan at this time.
All right. Now, there's much talk about the fact that this relations is mutually beneficial to both countries. But if we have to look at put things in perspective, China is the one doing all the investments. All the returns are going back to them, as the case may be, from the loans to all the physical infrastructure they have in the country. Apart from oil, what does Nigeria stand to benefit in this?
Well, the important thing is that, the railway sector connecting Nigeria, the transport sector generally is a huge challenge. So if at the end of this relationship, Nigeria has a standard gauge functional railway system, I think that's a whole lot of benefits, because the railway system, affects, the marginalized in the society, the poor people. It's not like the airways and all of that for the middle class and everything. So it's going to connect. If you look at the permit me to say the controversial Lagos Calabar railway, it's going to connect a whole lot of cities. So you can stand up in a city like Otueke, for instance, and in a couple of hours you find yourself in Lagos. So it's going to really open up our economy in terms of getting the have-nots, enjoy some of these facilities. So the long-term possibilities are endless, if you ask me. So there's a whole lot of takeaway for Nigeria. But that does not mean that, we would mortgage our country at this time. So
Okay.
it's going to be very, very useful, But when people talk about profitability, I will be cautious. It can be the trickle down effect will be great, but in terms of profitability of the project, I have my doubts.
Okay, like you're aware that China is not the first country that Nigeria approached for loan. The issue of Euro bond was actually there, and Nigeria wasn't particularly creditable, according to them. Now that China is partnering with Nigeria, do you think this will open up more room for credit for Nigeria?
Well, I think that again, it comes back to the kind of domestic, I don't want to use the word reforms, but that's what it is, reforms we do carry out. That we have very little choice than to go to China means that there are issues we need to take care of. And while we head towards China, it is also important we take care of some of those issues to make other countries and other investors get interested in what we're doing. Now, the important thing about this is that by the time we open up other channels, it will make us competitive in the kind of deals we get into, so that if we head to China and, it's not working out, we can head to elsewhere. And it's important we open up our options by doing the right thing and making, the right policies and making sure an investor wants to make money, really. So if we do not make, the conditions in the country competitive, investors will not come. So yeah, we head to China in the short term, but in the long run, I think it's important we make most of our sectors competitive, for other channels of investment and other investors to begin to consider.
All right, apart from China, there is the question of African countries trading amongst themselves. Why do we have this situation where African countries don't trade much with each other to give each other beneficial edge, apart from people or other countries rather outside the African continent?
Well, I think that you are wrong. African countries trade amongst themselves, but the trade have been informal. Nigeria, for instance, has more than 4,000 kilometers of land borders. I don't know whether you do know that. And what the issue here is that, there's a whole lot of informal trade going on. So what we need to do as a country is to see if we can formalize those trade relations. Nigeria does a lot of trade with a country like Benin Republic, for instance. I mean, if you go to the north, you will see that things that a country like a state like Borno has borders with Cameroon, with Niger, and I can tell you that those borders are as good as what you would imagine. So there's a whole lot of informal trade going on. What we need to do, and there's a whole lot of potentials, if we begin to formalize all those trade relations. That is one aspect. The second aspect is that you realize that interconnection in terms of air travels within Africa is really, really difficult. I think it's an area, continental bodies like AU should begin to consider. I want to go to Lilongwe, in Malawi, or go to the capital of Rwanda. I want to go there easily from Abuja, and I think that we cannot consider the potentials or harness the potentials of continental trade unless we begin to look at some of those issues. Again, there are issues of visa restrictions, and all of that. Those are important things. I mean, look at European Union. I mean, there are all kinds of conversations. You have your own perspectives, but the EU relationship, with all the challenges it's having, is enhancing inter-European trade. I think that as a continent, we need to begin to consider some of those policies so that we can harness the enormous internal potential we have as a continent within. And again, it has a way of when somebody understands that, look, I cannot invest in Nigeria at this time, but I can invest in Rwanda and Burundi and probably produce there, and my products find their way seamlessly into Abuja. Why not? If you feel that you are a francophone investor, you can invest in Niger, and things are organized so that your products and services find their way into Kano or into Borno and everything, and there's no conflict in that area. you will do what is convenient for you. So, but again, the continent has to make that happen with the right policies. Yes, there are potentials, but there's a lot to do.
All right. We still have with us Mr. Ken Ife. Just before we let you go, Mr. Ken, you heard our guests there talking about continental cooperation among the African countries. And the issue of WAMI and WAMZI, the West African country wanted to achieve a single inflation digit for years, and that has not happened. But there are some particular African countries that are making progress, like Rwanda, like Uganda, for instance, are meeting the MDG. What do you think they are doing that the West African countries are not doing?
No, the issues are different and very, very complex, because if you are going for a single currency, you have convergence criteria that you have to meet. Debt to GDP ratio, the inflation rate, the exchange rate. You've got to peg all those to plus minus 10%. And we're very far apart. I mean, in Nigeria, our external debt to GDP ratio is about 12 to 13%. Whereas in many countries that here alone, and they're over 100%. So you've got to wait for 100 years before you can actually bring those convergence, meet those criteria. But what we are now more interested in is, whilst working on that agenda, is to settle the cross-border trade, cross-border exchange, monetary exchange between the borders, so that if you pay your money in Naira, you just pick it up in Sierra Leone or wherever. So you can do all our settlement without having to route it to London or to America before it comes. So that, you raise your letter of credit here, then it's going to be honored, because the banks here in Nigeria that are in Sierra Leone have enough deposits to deal with, to support the transaction. So we're actually closing on those areas. But there are issues about informal trade that are not actually capturing the level of trade. They keep saying 10 to 12%, 10 to 12%, whereas in some cases it's actually more. In fact, if you look at Cote d'Ivoire and Senegal and Gambia, and look at the two neighboring countries, all these neighboring countries, they post about 40 to 45% intra-trade between them. But if you discount Nigerian oil and look at the trade, it seems something will rise about with something percent. So, the trade is going on, but the level of informal trade is so horrendous that are not being captured. But that is not to say that more could not be done. Of course, more can be done, because I'm from the ECOWAS Commission, I'm a consultant in private sector development, so I understand this terrain very well. There's a lot of bureaucratic issues that we have to come to terms with, and that's really what is derailing the entire integration process. And we're working on those. Obviously, part of this is regional infrastructure, because the more regional connectivity you have on power and road and transit, imagine if you have a rail line from Nigeria, Lagos.
All right, Ken. Ife, thank you very much for talking to us on TVC Breakfast. Now, we still have Uche Igwe with us on Skype from the UK. Uche, from your projections generally, what are the economic prospects for the economy going ahead from here for Nigeria?
Well, I think that the prospects are very fascinating. And let me say that even though the oil prices are increasing, the direction Nigeria should go is to diversify, in terms of going to the non-oil sectors of the economy. And for the kind of population we have, services are interesting areas for investors. So, and I think that the way to go will be to, set out the right kind of policy, to get people who are interested in investing. Look at MTN, for instance. It took the right kind of policy for the MTN and for other telecommunication companies to invest in Nigeria. If we can do it with the telecommunication sector, we can do it with other sectors. And, it will create employment and also reduce poverty, which is the very important issue we're grappling with. We will also be helping ourselves if we do something sustainable in terms of curbing corruption, because there are several, international entities who want to use that. I mean, in terms of corruption perception index and so many other criteria that investors will need to look at in terms of coming to invest. So yes, the prospects are good if we can diversify beyond oil, but also we need to put the right policies in place so that we can attract the right kind of people around the table.
Right, Mr. Uche Igwe, there many thanks for your thoughts on TVC Breakfast this morning. We appreciate that. And of course, Ken, we thank you for coming on. I will take a short break now and return with more on TVC Breakfast. Don't go away.